My name is Julie Noble, and welcome to the New York State Association of Conservation Commissions 2022 Conference on the Environment. I'm the Vice Chair of NYSDEC, and I am also the Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Kingston. Today, I am the moderator for this energy panel, and I want to welcome our presenters and all of our guests today. You are all on mute and you're all off screen, and I ask that you remain that way throughout the panel. If you would like to communicate with us at all or have any questions or comments, please feel free to use the chat. We really appreciate your patience in this process. This Gather Town format is fantastic and unique, but of course, any system where we are using an online system requires patience, and you are all exercising that, so thank you. Today, I'm very excited to host 4 different folks here with our energy panel, and I'm going to jump right in so that we can get right into it. First, I'd like to introduce Honorable Mike Cusick. Michael Cusick is a New York State Assembly member representing Staten Island and chair of the Assembly Energy Committee. Mike has worked to secure the energy grid against cybersecurity threats, increase the adoption of electric drive vehicles, and supported efforts to bring the offshore wind industry to New York. Prior to becoming Assemblyman, Mike served as Director of Constituent Services for Senator Schumer. Previously, Mike served as the Chief of Staff to Staten Island Assemblyman Eric Vitaliano. Mike began his career in public service as a special assistant to the President of the City Council. In addition to sitting on the Assembly committees on governmental employees, higher education, Veterans Affairs, and Ways and Means, Cusick is a member of the National Conference of State Legislators Energy Task Force and the Council of State Governments Energy and Environment Committee. Assemblyman, you have the floor.
Well, thank you so much, Julie. Thank you for that introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here today with all of you to talk about the Bond Act and to be part of this panel today. I know that today has been a comprehensive overview of the Bond Act and what is in it and how it will be enacted. And to be part of this energy panel, I am honored as chair of the Assembly Energy Committee. As a member of the State Assembly, I'm proud to have voted to forward this Bond Act for a vote the public this November. I think it is vital that this act is enacted for our future. You know, I always point to my young daughter as the reason why I get involved in public service, but in particularly as energy chair and to focus on climate change. Because it is imperative that we address the issues of climate change in New York, because we always are the leaders in this country on many things, and we should be the leaders when it comes to fighting climate change. And so it was great to work with my colleagues to get this on the legislative agenda and then ultimately passed. But also there were many other aspects that led to this. Many of you have been very active in getting the CLCPA enacted. So we have these goals that we must reach as a state in order to work towards fighting the climate change and to put in effect the many avenues that we are looking at as a state to bring renewable energy to every inch of this state. So in the Bond Act itself, I know that many of the panelists before and on other panels have talked about the environmental parts of this. I am focusing and have been told to focus on the energy parts of this and what is included in this. You know, what's important is that we are addressing in this, out of the $4.2 billion, 1.5 billion will be dedicated towards climate change mitigation and environmental justice. And many of these aspects would include green building retrofits, including increased energy efficiency, which is vital and I believe is overlooked many times. An installation of renewable energy projects at state-owned buildings, including CUNY, SUNY, community college, and public schools. This is an important part of the projects that will be funded by the Bond Act. Installation and operation of zero-emission school buses, which is a big issue in our committee for the last number of years. Many of my colleagues have bills in our committee that would address school buses and buses in general and the zero emissions issue. So installation and operation of zero emissions school buses and necessary infrastructure in support of new implementation of this is vital and will be part of this. Climate change adaptation and mitigation projects, including support for the Climate Smart Communities program, which I know will be discussed further on another panel if it hasn't already, and development of easily replicated renewable energy projects, which include solar arrays, heat pumps, and wind turbines in rural areas. Electric vehicle charging stations, municipal and state fleet electrification to improve air quality would also be eligible for funding under the Bond Act. These are very important aspects of the asks in the Bond Act, but these are issues that have been dealt with and we continue to deal with in the legislature up in Albany. These are areas that I know I can speak firsthand. The Assembly and the Assembly Energy Committee has focused on, and we are glad that it will be part of this and the funding will be there, because all of these projects and the implementation of these projects that I mentioned are all necessary in meeting the goals that we set in the CLCPA. And it is imperative that we reach these goals. So we need the funding to do that. And that's why we, particularly during this election cycle here locally, we're pushing to make sure people are voting for the Bond Act. And it is a pleasure to be working with all of you to make sure that we have the necessary funding to move forward on these issues, these projects that will certainly move this state forward as we move forward in fighting the climate change.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your thoughts and your comments. So now we're going to introduce Mark Lowery and Dazzle Ekblad. Mark Lowery is the Assistant Director of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation's Office of Climate Change. Mark currently leads the state's Interagency Climate Adaptation and Resilience Work Group and several other work groups focused on adaptation to the effects of climate change. He is the member of the Climate Action Council's Land Use and Local Government Advisory Panel and led development of the Council's Adaptation and Resilience recommendations for the Council's draft scoping plan. He holds a bachelor's degree in biology from Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and a master's degree in environmental and forest biology from SUNY ESF in Syracuse. Dazzle Ekblad has served as a climate policy analyst for New York State Department of Environmental Conservation since 2014. Originally from Minnesota, she works out of DEC's central office in Albany and leads the community engagement team at the Office of Climate Change. This team manages the Climate Smart Communities program and all its affiliated initiatives, including the Zero Emission Vehicle Rebates, Climate Smart Communities Grants, Climate Leadership Coordinators, and Climate Smart Community Certification Program. Dazzle holds a Master of Science in Natural Resources Policy from SUNY ESF, as well as a Master of Public Administration from the Maxwell School of Syracuse University. Outside of work, you'll find Dazzle digging in her garden, cruising the streets on her electric bike, or scanning the sky for raptors. I am going to hand it over to Mark and Dazzle. I do hear some background noise. So I'm not sure where that is coming from, but I will try to have Haven figure it out on our end. So you can go ahead, Mark. Mark, you're muted.
There we go. How about that?
Yes, all set.
Okay, sorry about that. Dazzle and I are both delighted to be here. We have recognized, I think, since the start of my career, and I think Dazzle's was started much later than mine, how important the EMCs and the CACs are, what important partners they are, and we're always delighted to speak to this conference. My job today is to talk about two major initiatives: the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act and the proposed Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act, and to try to bring them together. And I will do that largely focused on what we see as the intersection of these two initiatives as it relates to local governments. So I only have 10 minutes, so I will move pretty quickly. Many of you have seen some of the, much of the CLCPA presentation before, so I'm going to give just a very high level review of what the CLCPA is all about, and then talk about how it relates, how the Bond Act, if it is in fact enacted, would enable achievement of the CLCPA goals and requirements. So recall that the New York State enacted the CLCPA in 2019, and it went into effect on January 1st of 2020. The statute sets achievement of a net zero economy by 2050 as a goal, requiring an 85% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions while allowing for sequestration of up to 15% of our emissions. Although the Climate Act does not detail an emissions reduction plan per se, it does envision an overall strategy of beneficial electrification of the entire New York State economy, empowering that efficient electrified economy with clean sources of power. And there are several requirements related to that I won't take the time to detail now. The law created a Climate Action Council and charged it with developing a draft scoping plan for implementation of the CLCPA by January 1st of 2022. The draft scoping plan was released by the end of 2021 and released for public comment from January 1st through July 1st. Staff have reviewed more than 35,000 public comments that were submitted during the public comment period and during what I believe were 11 public hearings. And we have begun the process of summarizing those comments for the council at council meetings. So if you'd like to hear verbal summaries of the comments that were received, you can tune into a Climate Action Council meeting and hear someone like me or one of my colleagues relaying back to the council what we have heard from the public in our comments and what recommendations we are making for amendments that would be included in the final scoping plan, which under the laws due before January 1st of 2023. Once that final scoping plan comes out, DEC is required under the law to promulgate implementing regulations to achieve the required emission reductions in 1 more year. So very, very aggressive time frame and a lot of work for staff to do. Besides considering the public comments, the council will be wrestling with a few other major issues that will have to be addressed in the final plan. These include whether or not to go include a clean fuel standard, how we will handle the transition of our current gas infrastructure, and whether to recommend an economy-wide strategy such as a carbon tax or something like a carbon tax, carbon cap and invest program, if any economy-wide strategy. The draft scoping plan describes 3 action scenarios that have guided analysis of the options we have in meeting the greenhouse gas emission limits. Among the most important findings of this analysis, and this analysis is ongoing, but so far it has indicated that the level of required decarbonization that would be required to comply with the greenhouse gas emission reduction requirements in the law is feasible, but it will require aggressive action and investment across all of our emitting sectors. All of the examined scenarios include a heavy emphasis on rapid electrification and gains in energy efficiency that will have to be achieved. And all scenarios include zero emissions electricity generation by 2040 as required by the statute, but also full electrification of our building and transportation sectors, aggressive action to reduce vehicle miles traveled, a transition to low global warming potential refrigerants, and elimination of fugitive methane emissions. The transition to electrification for heating, water, and space would be implemented primarily through use of high efficiency heat pumps with a phase out events of sale of new gas appliances. That does not mean that anyone is coming around to confiscate gas stoves, but eventually sale of new appliances would be phased out. As we replace our fossil fuel heating systems with heat pumps, New York State's electrical power demand will transition from its current summer peak being a summer peaking system as it is now to a winter peaking system. And our total electricity demand will grow by 65 to 80% by 2050, which is the reason there are important parts of the law that require installation of renewable energy sources, as well as planning for transmission and distribution of that new renewable power. The draft scoping plan includes electrification of light-duty vehicles, and the governor has already signed legislation and issued an order that would ban the sale of gas and diesel-powered cars and trucks by 2035. Again, banning the sale, not the possession of gas and diesel-powered cars. To help achieve climate justice and conserve land, the plan calls for enhanced mass transit, smart growth, and other strategies to reduce vehicle miles traveled. The plan includes strategies to eliminate high global warming potential refrigerants, as I mentioned, as well as fugitive methane emissions across the waste, agriculture, and energy sectors, while maximizing carbon sequestration in New York's lands and forests through land conservation and improved soil and forest management. The draft scoping plan includes numerous recommendations for improved state support for local governments, particularly in the clean energy, transportation, waste and wastewater, and land use sectors, and to enhance local adaptation and resilience. You will find, however, very few, if any, mandates among the draft scoping plan for local governments. Rather, the draft scoping plan focuses on direct state funding, incentives, and other forms of support for local governments and others. And that, of course, is where the proposed clean water, clean air, and green jobs environmental bond act comes in. And again, I don't have the time to review the draft scoping plan recommendations in detail, or to describe the bond act provisions that might be applied to support implementation of these recommendations. So let me just provide a very high level overview with the important provisos that the bond act is only hypothetical unless the voters find that measure on the back of their ballots in many jurisdictions and in fact approve it on November 8th. Further details of agency bond act programs are still very much in the early stages of development. And I anticipate that if the bond act is passed and covers some projects currently funded through the EPF, Environmental Protection Fund, we may be able to direct more EPF funding to project types not covered by the bond act. But of course, that's not certain either until we see how things shape up. The draft scoping plan does include policies to encourage use and promotion of energy efficiency and clean energy by local governments. Although the Bond Act would not support implementation of all of the draft scoping plan's recommendations, the Bond Act climate mitigation category does include funding that could contribute to local greenhouse gas mitigation goals, including funds for electrification of schools and school buses, as the Assemblyman mentioned. Transportation strategies in the draft scoping plan include encouraging a rapid transition to zero emission vehicles and non-road equipment, and include promotion of transit-oriented development as a critical element of smart growth by making public transportation and low carbon transportation alternatives more affordable, more attractive, accessible, and convenient, and for planning infrastructure and development to allow more efficient use and sustainable use of our landscape. Although the proposed Bond Act does not include funds targeted to transportation infrastructure per se, Projects under the climate adaptation and mitigation line could support smart growth planning and projects to enhance ridership on mass transit. Draft scoping plan strategies included in the waste reduction, reuse, and recycling theme are intended to address the full life cycle of materials and products from product creation to the beneficial use of materials that would otherwise have been wasted. Other strategies would support transformation of what we currently call wastewater treatment plants, which are focused on disposal of waste, to convert them to water resource recovery facilities with a focus on capture of beneficial products such as biogas, biosolids, and of course, clean water. So other strategies would promote reclamation or destruction of high global warming potential refrigerants and regulate certain end uses of those refrigerants. The proposed Bond Act would include substantial funding for water and wastewater infrastructure, including sewering, and the climate adaptation and mitigation line could fund municipal projects to reduce emissions of methane by reducing the amount of landfilled organic waste. This line could also be used to address municipal emissions of high global warming potential chemicals such as refrigerants and sulfur hexafluoride. Achieving enough additional carbon, soil, and forest sequestration to offset 15% of our emissions will be difficult because New York State is already so heavily forested. But the draft scoping plan does include numerous regulatory and investment strategies to maximize what we can achieve in terms of forest and carbon sequestration. As I mentioned, smart growth is central to strategies to reduce VMT and their associated transportation emissions. Many of the draft scoping plan's land use strategies are focused on strengthening the role of regional and local based land use planning to guide, inform, and incentivize smart, equitable, sustainable land use decisions at the regional and municipal levels. The proposed Bond Act includes funds for acquisition and management of land, specifically to sequester carbon and methane, as well as for numerous categories of restoration and revitalization projects. In addition to the greenhouse gas mitigation strategies included in the draft scoping plan, the scoping plan includes recommendations related to adaptation and resilience. The 60+ adaptation and resilience recommendations are grouped in the scoping plan as 12 initiatives organized under these 3 broad themes: building capacity, communities and infrastructure, and living systems. The recommendations within these themes are particularly focused on flooding and extreme heat, and the proposed Bond Act includes funding to address these and other hazards. In fact, the Bond Act would include so many categories of funding to enhance our resilience to climate change. I had to reduce the font size to fit them all on the slide, but you get the idea. You have also probably noticed that I have repeated several categories of Bond Act funding across the several scoping plan recommendations, which does reflect the fact that planning is still in progress and agency staff are still looking for overlaps and gaps in funding and planning how to address them. I do, however, want to call your particular attention to one line that has shown up on just about every slide: $100 million for climate adaptation and mitigation. It is our current understanding of the Bond Act language that this $100 million allocation would be subject to all the requirements of the Climate Smart Communities Grants Program, and the funds would constitute an expansion of that existing Climate Smart Community Grants Program with which many of you are familiar. That interpretation may be subject to change, but even if it holds, it could result in changes to, and even if it holds, could result in changes to the Climate Smart Community Program. We are not yet prepared to discuss yet. But with that as introduction, my colleague Dazzle Ekblad will now change seats with me and explain how the current Climate Smart Community Grants program operates, with the understanding that even if the Bond Act is proposed, we would probably continue with much the same program that we have now, with some potential important improvements. So with that, Dazzle.
Right. Thank you, Mark. So as you can tell, Mark is an encyclopedic font of knowledge, and people of New York State should be grateful to have his leadership in this historic transition, both in terms of the Climate Act itself and certainly in this usage of this bond act. If it does pass, it's going to give us a whole lot more resources to make this transition. So what I'm going to do is try to be pretty quick because I think we might be maybe running a little
We're
bit
just about on time,
long.
I think.
Okay, Mark says we're on time, so
But I'll defer to Julie on that.
yeah, Julie, let me know if we need to cut anything to this short. I certainly want to give Midge plenty of time. My intent here is to give a little bit of context about the Climate Smart Communities program as a whole, and then dig a little bit into some of the details of the Climate Smart Grant program, given this possibility that the funding behind the program may double potentially under the Bond Act. Let me dive in here. So as a reminder, the Climate Smart Communities program is a broad umbrella that covers a lot of different initiatives in a big kind of stroke. It's a broad brush. It's just state support for local climate action. There are 7, soon to be 8, as I understand it, agencies that support the program. DEC is the main administrator. That's why you're hearing from me and Mark from the DEC's Office of Climate Change. But we have many partners, and we see it as a program through which local governments can access state resources and kind of have a little bit of guidance in navigating all these different resources that are available at the state level for local governments as they relate to reducing emissions and adapting to climate change. The program is meant to be comprehensive and flexible. We recognize New York State is a big place, and I hope that you guys have good representation at this conference from all those different parts of New York State that have different needs, different priorities, different cultures and values even. So we hope that the Climate Smart Communities has the flexibility to support different kinds of communities. Here are the pledge elements that structure the whole program. I'm not going to go into these in detail, but just as a reminder that it is a program that covers a wide range of topics. And in my opinion, if you look closely at anything, it's all affected by climate change because it is literally the air, the water, the context in which we survive and hopefully thrive as human beings. So this is a program that touches on a lot of different topics, and here's those 10 pledge elements. And as a community that is participating in the program, the first step is to pass a pledge that includes all 10 of these elements verbatim. So that would be your town board or your city council would pass a pledge, become a registered Climate Smart community as the first step in participating, and that pledge must include all these 10 elements. So at this point, the program has been around since 2009. Mark was part of the original group of people who designed and conceived of the program. So at this point, we have high levels of participation. Nearly half of the population of New York State lives in a registered Climate Smart community, and you can kind of see the distribution of those communities on this map. In addition, in 2018, we launched a certification program. So this is a program that has a list of over 100 actions. I'll talk a little bit more about those actions. And it's a way of navigating the process of figuring out what to do about climate change at the local level, what the options are. And so at this point, I am proud to say that just this year we passed over 100 certified Climate Smart communities, and that was announced during Climate Week. So the program has made tremendous progress since it was announced in 2014 is when the certification program was launched. I think I said 2018. Sorry about that. 2018 is when the certification platform, this website that you see lots of links to in my certification, 2018 is when the website was released. And I see Julie nodding because she was part of the program in 2013 and 14 when the program was conceived and developed, the certification program that is. So it's come a long way since 2014. So here's just a little bit more about the certification program and what it is. In my opinion, the certification program offers a lot of value for leadership recognition, but also just as a roadmap of sorts. So even if your municipality would never go through the documentation and the work that it takes to actually get certified, it's a great place to find examples of good projects to follow, examples to inspire you, and just guidance on how to go about this. Since climate change is so cross-cutting and so pervasive in the way that it touches all aspects of our lives, these actions that are part of the certification program offer some guidance on how to approach it, how to identify some foundational planning and studies that might help you identify priorities. So I also want to be sure that I take some time today to talk about the funding programs that are managed by DEC's Office of Climate Change by me and my team. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but I do want to mention our municipal zero emission vehicle program. So this includes both rebates for municipalities that want to add electric vehicles to their fleets, as well as grants for those municipalities that want to add EV charging stations within their community. And we just closed a round of this program last Friday, a week ago, I guess. And there's tremendous interest in the program. We appreciate the level of participation in this program when we anticipate being able to offer further rounds, but that program is closed right now. And so the Bond Act has the most relevance, it appears, to the Climate Smart grant. So I'm going to talk about those in a little more detail. This is a program that has been around since 2016. And it is, again, managed by me and my team here at the Office of Climate Change. And this is also a program where currently the only eligible applicants are local governments. However, there are plenty of local governments that partner with the regional planning organization or other partners to implement a project, but the lead applicant must be a local government. So that's a city, town, village, or county government. It is a competitive program, and it is a program that requires a 50% match. However, there are lots of different ways that municipalities can meet that match. It could be partnering with a philanthropic foundation that provides half the cost. It could be a cash match directly from the municipal budget, but also in-kind matches allowed. So if you have a municipality where you have staff that's going to devote part of their time to a certain grant project, that can be recognized as match. The Climate Smart grants, as they have been run since 2016, cover a wide range of project types, and it is, as Mark kind of alluded to, it is kind of to be determined if the structure of the program may shift a little bit given the likely influx of money from the Bond Act. There may be a way in which some project types will be funded by other types of the Bond Act. So we may focus on other project types that wouldn't be funded by other parts of the Bond Act, but that is yet to be seen. But some key things about the Climate Smart grants is that they do cover planning projects as well as implementation projects, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And it is a program that covers GHG mitigation, reducing the greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change, as well as adaptation projects. I will say that most of the project types within the GHG mitigation category are mainly outside the power sector, so they don't focus on energy or buildings. But let me tell you a little bit more about that. So as I mentioned, Climate Smart grants has essentially sort of two big categories, one that we call certification, which is essentially the planning projects. And then the other category is the implementation category, and that has two subcategories within it that I'll go into. But just so you have a little bit more of a sense about the certification category, these are inventories, studies, assessments. I've given a couple of examples on the screen here, and these are generally smaller awards. The smallest awards are as little as $10,000. Now remember that that would mean a project that has a total cost of $20,000, since that's the actual grant size would be $10,000, and then it would match by another $10,000 from the municipality. And currently this year, the biggest awards for the certification category are $200,000. So we hope that this is a range that can be suitable for a small community as well as some of the larger ones. So again, these grants go to projects that help gather baseline data about greenhouse gas emissions, that would help a municipality manage its fleet better by doing a fleet inventory, things like that. But it also, there are some project types related to materials management, especially organics and planning for organics. There's also a set of land use related planning actions, such as a natural resource inventory, that are fundable. And then also adaptation related actions, such as vulnerability assessment and a climate adaptation plan. So on the implementation side, as I said, there are two kind of subcategories, but broadly, the implementation projects are larger projects, and these are kind of implementation construction oriented type projects. So the maximum award here is up to $2 million. So some of these projects may be fairly sizable. So this is the energy panel, and I'm certainly talking about a lot of things that are not related to energy, so I want to acknowledge that, but I want to bring some particular attention to this GHG mitigation category, the Climate Smart grants, that in the past has funded some projects that are related to energy use, but again, mainly outside of the power sector and in transportation. So for example, we've funded many projects that are focused on reducing VMT, or vehicle miles traveled, such as bike lanes, projects to improve sidewalks, especially for daily commuting kind of needs. And we also fund projects that are related to improving energy efficiency and anaerobic digestion, in particular bringing food scraps into wastewater treatment plants to prevent those food scraps from ending up in landfills and producing methane. We also, within that category, have projects for refrigerants, or these fluorinated gases that are particularly powerful at trapping heat in our atmosphere. So those could include a municipality, say, that owns an ice rink, changing out the refrigerant from an older ice rink to from an older refrigerant to a lower global warming potential refrigerant that is less powerful at causing climate change. And as I said, we also cover adaptation projects. So these could be living shorelines, these could be flood risk reduction projects like right-sizing bridges or culverts. It's a pretty wide range of topics, and there's lots more information online. So if you want more information, I encourage you to check out our websites. I didn't want to close today without also acknowledging that we've given you lots and lots of information, and you may be coming up with ideas and looking for help. I'm really excited to say that just this year, we were able to fund a set of climate smart communities coordinators. So we have at least one coordinator in every one of the 10 regions across the entire state, and they have expertise in helping municipalities design good grant projects. So they can help you navigate these various funding programs and look at what are the best possibilities for your municipality and what might be a good fit. So please get in touch with them. They are fun people, and they're really knowledgeable, and they're there to help. And that is it. Thank you for your attention. And I think we're gonna move on at this point. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Dazzle and Mark, for such tangible examples of how this Bond Act could impact our state. Now I'd like to pass it over to Midge Iorio. Midge Iorio is Executive Director of the nonprofit Bedford 2030, where she has built a robust and trusted brand, engaged thousands of community members, and expanded the organization's programs, participants, and impact. As community ambassador, Midge organized Bedford 2030's car show, New York State's first fuel-efficient car/EV show, and the recent adoption of Bedford 2030's Climate Action Plan. Midge is committed to climate action and to fighting for greenhouse gas reductions, and ultimately for clean, healthy air, water, and land. She has lived in Katona for 22 years with her husband, Frank, and 2 sons, and has been a proud active community member of several local organizations. Midge, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you, NYSDEC. I'm delighted to be here on behalf of Bedford 2030 and really honored to be on this panel with New York State and really national climate action and policy leaders. So when we first talked about this panel, we talked about really we can't know at this moment how, if the Bond Act passed, how the funds would flow down to one municipality. And let me mention, I'm shifting the focus here from a kind of a wide state perspective, narrowing in on the town of Bedford, New York. But what we agreed would be interesting to talk about is how the private-public partnership between Bedford 2030 and our town leaders, how we have leveraged government funding to support and advance our climate action goals. So I'm going to just really quickly just tell you, because I don't know if everyone knows who Bedford 2030 is. Our mission is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and preserve natural resources. We are a community climate activist nonprofit in Bedford and northern Westchester, New York. We work in a private-public partnership with the town of Bedford, and over the past 10 years, we have offered education programs and resources to mobilize our community in climate action. We did achieve our initial goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 20% by 2020. We actually exceeded it. And in 2020, we did collaborate with the town of Bedford and adopted a new 2030 climate action plan with goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2030, to get to net zero by 2040, and to preserve natural resources. And to achieve these goals, we're focused on what we call our 3 pillars of climate action, which are the same as the states and the countries in the world. One is what we call high performance buildings. We know that 50% of our local emissions come from our buildings, and that's mostly heating oil. 48 from transportation. That's our clean transportation is our next pillar. And then our 3rd pillar is what we call rooted solutions. And the idea is to tap in to natural systems to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So what are we doing to address these goals? And how are we driving action and impact? And first is really working through a private-public partnership with our town. by joining with our amazing town supervisor and town board, and Bedford has the best conservation board. We are able to really add capacity to the town's climate action goals. We can work in partnership with the town, but in a way that's more flexible than a local government. And importantly, we can provide support in applying for grants and in achieving the milestones for a wonderful program like Climate Smarts Community, helping the town to achieve the milestones to be able to access grant funding. We also collaborate with the town on programs and community engagement activities. And one example is that picture in the left of all the people. We've run Solarize and Heat Smart campaigns in our community, and we've partnered with the town for many years to bring in community members who make those kind of upgrades in their home, and at town board meetings actually celebrate that. So I'm going to just move on, and please, Julie, tell me if I need to cut anything short. So how have we in the past, and now how are we working with the town to leverage government funding to advance our climate action goals? And I do want to add that we are a registered climate smart community too. So we really started actually with, this is a really impressive fact, but we started with a grant of $2.6 million that was partially from the EPA and partially from New York State to market a New York State program to drive home energy upgrades. And we piloted what was called the Energize program in Bedford. And that program expanded from Bedford to several other Westchester communities. But what's really important is what that money did was we educated the community in Bedford and beyond really about the idea of energy efficiency and the cost and climate benefits. And by promoting that program for 8 years, we really drove behavior change. We have done, NYSDEC funded Solarize and Heat Smart campaigns, and we've tapped into the Clean Energy Communities program, which is a NYSDEC program to access funding for LED street lights to advance. We've gotten grants that we've used to create bike and bus shelters to advance transportation initiatives. And recently, we actually are really proud that the town, working with Bedford 2030, received a Clean Energy Community grant for $110,000 to do an original program called the Building Health and Performance Initiative. And the goal of that program is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve health and air quality, and lower energy costs for multifamily buildings, which is actually accounts for about 30% of our building stock. So I'm just gonna move on, but after hearing Dazzle's presentation, we definitely have to step it up, working with the town to access more climate smart communities grant funding. And I'm gonna just kind of for the next minute go through some of our current programs and talk about how highlight how in each of our 3 pillars, how government funding, whether it comes from the Bond Act passing or the recent Inflation Reduction Act or programs like Clean Energy Communities and Climate Smart Communities, would advance the work that we're doing right now to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So for high performance buildings, one of our programs is an energy coach, and this is a free resource to help building owners and homeowners make upgrades. And along with accessing money for the town and for our climate action goals, we also want to make sure that we are pairing people with any kind of state or federal incentive that would help them make an upgrade that would that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So one of the things we also really want to do is get our energy coach, who's already sharing New York State program information, helping people understand for the Inflation Reduction Act if they qualify and making sure they're tapping into that money. I'm going to go on for clean transportation. We have clean ride and drive tools to help community members embrace electric vehicles and to learn all the benefits of that. We have in our school district, we have 200 school buses, and right as of now, 1 school bus has been ordered. So if the Bond Act was to pass, that would be amazing to get the funds that Mark was talking about to infuse more electric school buses and to infuse infrastructure for all of those school buses. And then finally, in Rooted Solutions, this is an action area where we want to, as I mentioned, tap into natural resources as a climate solution. And for that pillar of action, this isn't exactly energy related, but we created a Bedford eco map that includes a natural resource and carbon inventory, as well as social and environmental drivers to really understand where we can have the most impact, tapping into and preserving our natural resources, and examples of Rooted Solutions initiatives that would benefit from government funding or our efforts to conserve and increase our tree canopy to store and capture carbon, projects to address the threat of that native plants pose to our local trees, and efforts to create a community of Bedford land stewards to take actions from planting native trees and plants to considering less lawn, to moving from gas-powered lawn equipment would all make a huge difference. And actually kind of tying back to the funding, we are using a Clean Energy Communities grant to launch a gas-powered lawn equipment buyback to reduce emissions that we launched at our Clean Ride and Drive Expo on Saturday. And I just wanted to share that we were overwhelmed. We had over 20 community members came and dropped off these polluting pieces of lawn equipment, and we were able to use the Clean Energy Communities funding to give them a coupon towards buying a new piece of electric equipment. So thank you very much. I think I covered a lot really quickly, so I hope some of that was useful. And if anyone's interested in learning or talking more, I'd be delighted to talk anytime. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Midge. That was great to see so many local examples, especially how all the work that Bedford 2030 is doing and the way that the new Bond Act could impact. We have time for 1 or 2 questions, and then we need to get out of the room so the next group can get in. From the chat, I pulled a few here, and I'm going to just ask to all of our panelists, and if you'd like to answer, you can chime in. One is, in regard to waste reduction, does the draft scoping plan point toward a circular economy or expanded producer responsibility? Mark, do you want to take that one?
I was not involved in that panel, and I don't know all the details of all the panel's recommendations. My recollection from reading is that there are references to an overall goal of achieving a circular economy eventually, but the recognition that will take time, and that much of the early efforts, because of the value in terms of global warming prevention, it lies in reducing methane emissions early. There's a lot of emphasis on trying to achieve that through better organic waste management at this point.
Great, thank you. Another question, disadvantaged communities are challenged to put the time and focus into application to the Climate Smart Communities program. What is New York State DEC doing to assist such cities in achieving certification and getting the benefits of the program?
That's a great question. I think the most obvious answer are the Climate Smart Communities coordinators. And we are fortunate in that there is a new line in the Environmental Protection Fund in New York State's EPF that is labeled climate coordinators. So that's a line that we hope will be funded kind of indefinitely into the future to support those coordinators. And they do have an emphasis on supporting communities that are disadvantaged communities and building their capacity to navigate some of these state funding programs, including the Climate Smart grants. And I think in general, you know, the barriers report, I encourage folks to look at the barriers report that was released in relation to the Climate Act, because there are some great recommendations in there for the state to improve and streamline its funding and incentive and support programs generally, especially for disadvantaged communities, to make the process easier. And the Climate Smart grants are constrained by the fact that in the statute that governs them, 50% match is required currently.
They must be competitive.
Yeah, and it must be competitive. Thank you. So that means that we get a batch of grants, and sort of whichever application meets the scoring criteria the best gets funded. So there are other ways of funding support programs that can make them much more accessible to communities that find these programs difficult to navigate. So we hope that New York State will get better at serving those communities and kind of have a recognition that those communities have been marginalized, sometimes very directly by some state programs. That's a problem. And I think the state is doing a better job than it has in the past of facing those challenges and listening to the advice of the Climate Justice Working Group and in trying to bring those voices at the table and improve the programs. But it is a challenge, so I appreciate the question.
Great. And that's all the time we have right now. I know there was a few more questions in the chat, but I would encourage folks to reach out to our panelists. And also, if you're heading back to GatherTown to meet up in a lounge and chat there, you can also reach out to me and I'd be happy to help folks connect. I want to thank Michael, Mark, Dazzle, and Midge for your time and everyone for attending today. I encourage you to continue on with the conference for the rest of the day. You can head back into GatherTown by simply closing out Zoom and entering back into Gather. Click on the bottom right calendar and you can go directly to the next meeting. I want to thank everyone so much, and we'll see you all soon.